talking about worst case scenarios.
Michael on the toilet.
We are planning on cruising a lot in areas where we are gonna have to pump out regularly, the ICW being probably the most prominent area. And instead of having to deal with finding pump outs, we're actually opting to switch out to a composting head. We're using an Air Head system, which has not a passive vent, but it actually has a powered vent. And we like the design of it because you can remove the liquids tank without having to disturb the solids tank, which you would have to do with the nature set. So yeah, this is going. The base of this head has an 11 millimeter through bolts to the hull, or to this fiberglass plate. It's not quite the hull. And then we've got the water intake, which is raw water. I already have the C-cop closed on that. And there's a secondary valve that is a few inches back from our sea strainer that runs to this hose, and that is also closed. So we might get a little bit of water, but shouldn't be too much. So we can get rid of this raw water line completely up to that shutoff valve. And then we also then have the raw water discharge in the back here. Kind of a tight space, but the good news is that when removing these lines, we'll undo the metal bands, the stainless steel flex bands, and then cut the hose. You don't want to really try to be muscling it off. You're going to end up breaking any PVC or plastic parts. But really, it's just the hose is not going to be reusable anyway. Other parts of the head might be reusable, but that won't be. All right, so the crappy job aboard Hope continues. We've gotten the head out, so now we are moving on to our holding tank, and then we've got our Y valve, macerator pump, and the through hull. There's a couple of things connected to the tank that we need to remove first and foremost. One is we have a line here, this wire, that's to tie us into our galvanic isolator, which helps keep galvanic corrosion down on all of our metal parts on the boat. Then there's a vent line. It's a 1-inch flexible tube line that goes to a vent up above on the side deck. So we'll remove that as well. And then the big ones here are the actual hoses going to our head. This is where it gets gross, is because we have a vented loop in this system, a small loop that comes from the toilet, and the pressure from pumping sends it up and over and down to this top to fill the tank, and then we pump from the bottom. Now, since there might still be some stuff in the system, it is possible that at any one of these kind of high roller coaster low spots that we're going to find some waste. So we're going to be very careful. We're not going to muscle lines around. We're not going to try to pry this thing off. We'll cut everything like we did on the other side so that we could just bend everything off gently. And then hopefully, as we're removing it, we can keep one end tucked into a bucket and just work it really slowly. I'm really not looking forward to this, as you can imagine. But the good/bad news is that the reason we were planning on doing this job anyway, but we encountered the unfortunate situation of, I believe, and I'll confirm this because I doubt our tank split. It's a good tank. It was replaced more than a few years ago, but I think the previous owners did it, so it's no more than 7 or 8 years old. Thankfully, I think the system should mostly be empty. So it'll be gross, but maybe not as gross. All right, so as you may or may not know, the Air Head Composting Toilet gets its name because it has a fresh air venting system. The fan that draws air away from the toilet helps bring in drier, fresh air to kind of keep the toilet doing its job. So that means that you need to install a fan housing on the deck side, underdeck side, and some type of housing on the other side of the deck that then would have a mushroom head or a solar fan head, some type of head or unit that would keep dorade vent, something that would keep water from getting in. We didn't want to cut a new hole in the boat. There's very few holes already in our boat, and it's another thing that you have to worry about leaking, and we just didn't want to have to deal with that. And since we knew we would be removing all of our sewage lines, if we ever do go back to a standard marine head, we would have to rerun those lines anyway. They were old. They needed to be replaced. So we just got rid of all the sewage lines. And so what we decided to do is we are taking advantage of where the deck fill for pump out used to be. And we actually installed a Vetus stainless steel mushroom head, which can be closed, mushroom vent, which can be closed. So if we're sailing, we can close it down, especially if we're on a port tack, or starboard tack technically, with the port side and the rail. So yeah, we decided to use that, and I'll show you from the inside first what we're looking at here. So here's the fan housing from the deck side, or the underdeck side. You can see that we have two wires here. We've yet to wire the fan. This will run back. We've got a 12-volt plug on our panel. This runs our 12-volt plug, so if we're charging off-grid, anything that can accept 12 volts, we're going to be doing a lot of charging through 12-volt. So I'm just going to run it directly to this 12-volt switch. The fan housing, this is where the old deck fill, on the other side of where the old deck fill used to come. And as a matter of fact, this venting hose follows essentially the same path that the old venting hose, or the old deck fill hose for pump out, used to run, which is straight down, and then that runs through underneath the settee here. And when I open all that up, I'll show you what we're doing there. But yeah, simple. The fan housing has 6 screws that we just screwed up into this plate. It sits incredibly flush. I know that some people put a gasket here, but for me, it seems flush enough. I don't think we're gonna have any air leakage, but I'll feel around there after we install this just to confirm that. And yeah, super simple. So the fan sits inside of this housing. This line, or this tube, just screws in to the threaded piece on the inside of the housing and is running down. And this is I think a 15-foot piece of hose that I'll put a link to. We just got it from Lowe's. It doesn't need to be anything special. It just needed to be the right type of hose, which it's the same size as what Air Head ships, and it fits all of the pieces properly, and it cost us about what it would cost to have Air Head ship us some stuff. So we decided just to get that. So here is what I was talking about outside. This is the Vetus Marine stainless steel mushroom ventilator. I think this is their smallest size, which is a 4-inch diameter. It's a simple screw top ventilator. We can close it down or open it, and the fan housing sits on the other side. And then what we did was we got this teak. It's basically a winch base with a 15-degree angle on it, and we put that down into place. So the old deck fill used to be screwed in just like our diesel fill here with 3 bolts. The pump out was a little bit larger than this, but the idea being is we have 3 bolts that match up to the old holes, so that this base is screwed directly into the deck where the deck fill was, and then this unit is screwed into the teak. I think it looks clean. I think it works great. I mean, it's on there solidly. Our only concern is that we've got our sheet line for the Genoa. When we're tracked all the way aft, it's not a problem, but as we move forward, there is a potential for snagging. But what we'll end up doing is just throwing a snatch block on here in light wind conditions or downwind, that we can pull this off the deck and still run it cleanly back to our winch.
Okay, we're inside Hope, but it doesn't look pretty right now. Let me show you. Even Bowie is feeling the pain. So we have pieces of our new composting head that Michael is installing. And we decided to install it right beside our berth. I'm kidding. But not too far away. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
What's going on in here?
Well, I just installed our landing pad, which this will be the base for our Air Head Composting Toilet. We had to install this because the toilet extends farther out than the original space that our standard marine head was in. The liquids tank needs to be supported. Basically, the old bulkhead ends back all the way back where this bulkhead, roughly where this bulkhead lines up. And so we didn't have the space. So I went and I found some nice pieces of red oak. One was an 8-inch board, the other was a 12-inch board. And I laminated those two boards together so I could get the right depth. And then we cut it down into this shape, rounding off the edges so that if we bust our shins in the middle of the night while sailing, going to the bathroom, that we'll be in better shape. Hopefully not hurt ourselves as badly. The wood is about $40. Laminated it with several coats of epoxy, rounded off the edges, and then we just screwed them in with number 12 2-inch long, or was it 2.5-inch long stainless steel screws, pre-drilling into the fiberglass and then mounting the screws. I also laid down some caulking, some Life Seal, which is also an adhesive. We've got adhesive underneath this as well as the screws.
And that's where the venting.
Yeah, and that's where the vent hose will pass through. Mm-hmm. So this will be nice and solid and durable. We even added some mounting brackets that run up against this bulkhead here just to give it a little bit of extra rigidity.
I think Bowie wants to make sure you did a good job too.
So welcome to the future. And in the future, we have a fully plumbed airhead because there is no plumbing. There's a vent line, which basically follows how our old holding tank setup was plumbed, meaning we used to have a sewage line that came through this hole and then up and around and into an access port inside of this side of the settee storage. And in here was our holding tank itself. And it was originally a 15-gallon holding tank, but somebody along the way replaced it, and they used an Island Packet 37 holding tank, which is actually 18 gallons. So we had slightly larger holding tank. So we just followed the plumbing route, but instead of obviously going to the holding tank, our air vent now runs up behind the settee storage, and then it actually comes up behind our electrical panel here. And it's probably dark, so you can still see it. So it comes up from behind the electrical panel, and we've got our vent up here, which goes to the mushroom vent out on deck. I have all this undone because I still have to wire the fan. After the fan is wired, then everything will be good and operational. So yeah, that's the cool thing about the Airhead, is that we still have a through-hole fitting that we will be closing off in the future. We'll remove it the next time we haul out, glass over, do multiple layers of glass, get that good and solid. So we're removing a hole from the boat. We then will have 100% storage in the center settee, which used to be a macerator, Y valve, multiple plumbing lines, pretty much unusable for anything that smell could get into, because if you store it in there, it's going to smell like sewage. Same with this other settee storage area. It was our holding tank, and if we had anything stored in there, not only would it have smelled like sewage, it would have been covered in sewage, because when our holding tank gave out, which was the beginning of this whole project, it would have had a nice coating of wonderful things. So that is probably coolest thing about this project, is we have gained all of this space for storage, and it's awesome. I'm really excited for that.
Good job, babe. Pew! It's been about a year since we installed our Air Head compost head, and we thought it might be a good time to just reconnect and share any tips or things we've learned along the way. So we have at least 5 things we definitely wanted to share with you. First being...
Yeah, the first is when we installed ours, the normal Airhead kit comes with 5 feet of hose. And that 5 feet goes from the toilet to your deck. We did things differently. We added about 15 additional feet of hose for a total of 20 feet. Because of that, we needed more airflow. Thankfully, we found a seller on Etsy who was able to 3D print a fan housing with custom sizing to fit our hose, so we could add a second hose in line, second fan in line, and that has greatly improved our airflow and has greatly increased the health of our compost. The other thing too is that we're kind of in a humid environment, and I think if you're in a humid environment, even with 5 feet of hose, you might want to consider either a larger fan, or there might be other things to consider for getting adequate airflow, because the moist air really is going to be working against you a little bit.
Yeah, and we'll definitely share a link to that Etsy seller. His customer service was stellar, and we would love to support him more. A second thing that we started doing was initially we would spray out the compost head bowl like with vinegar and water solution, which is what we use for cleaning most of the boat. But we developed a gnat problem, and we later learned that vinegar can actually track those kinds of gnats. So we switched that out for a mostly water with a teeny bit of bleach solution, which we just spray, after each use, and that has worked really well. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think a secondary benefit of that is that when you're cleaning and replacing the contents of the solids tank, cleaning with bleach, it really kind of helps with the overall cleaning. There's very little to clean because you're doing it every time that you use the unit.
Good point. Third tip is about adding
Yeah, we added a small wood shim on the back side or the back edge of the bottom part of the toilet. Essentially what that does is it tilts the unit slightly forward and it allows your liquids to run more effectively downhill. This way it keeps your liquids out of the solids, and that's really the key to success with a unit like this.
A fourth tip is something we just learned today, actually. Airhead had messaged us and shared a pro user tip, which I find intriguing, about wanting to know how you become a pro user. But this pro tips is pretty awesome. So they recommend using a wet bag and putting your cocoa coir and water in there and just mixing it in there. And the advantages of that are twofold. One is that you don't get your hands messy, and it also cuts down on any kind of dust from the cocoa coir. So we're actually going to try that next and see how that works out. So
yeah, and we've been finding we get probably about 2 good weeks out of a brick of cocoa coir. We could go a little bit longer, but it makes the transfer of solids a little bit more messy, I guess you could say. It's not necessarily messy. I think that's the wrong word for it. It's just far simpler and neater if we do it at 2 weeks. The core itself is easier to transfer. And on top of that, what we found is really effective is that when the day that we replace the solids is the day that we start a new batch of core. It gives you plenty of time to add liquid to the core and let it just kind of sit. You can let it sit for a couple of days, however long, several hours, and it just makes the breakup a lot easier the more time it sits and has that humidity and moisture to break down. And then you're not caught unaware. When you need to make the change, you've already got a fresh batch, and it just makes everything simpler.
So we hope those are helpful for anyone considering getting a compost head or already started and maybe wants to troubleshoot or adjust how you're handling it. Also, we'll include a link to Michael's blog post, and that goes into detail about the why behind us switching from a marine head to a compost head, and why we still, a year later, are very happy with that decision and would never go back. And it goes into the ecological impact as well. So please check that out, and we hope this is helpful, and we'll talk to you next time.
Adios.
Happy pooping!
So, talking about worst case scenarios.
Michael on the toilet.
And I won't even talk about our personal experience of having a holding tank that broke and opened up and leaked. Because there's lots of ways that a traditional marine head can fail. You can have clogs in the line. You can have holding tanks explode. You can have if you have a pressure vac system, you can lose power to the flushing mechanism. There's joker valves. There's all sorts of things that need to be maintained. I can already tell by breaking up the coconut core and having had to replace a joker valve on our old toilet, as well as a few other things, replacing the actual pumping mechanism on our old toilet, the annual maintenance that needs to be done when you're dealing with this valve that suctions human waste through. It's not very fun. Digging in some musty dirt is going to be a hell of a lot better than that. But that's not really what we're talking about as far as a worst case scenario. We've read and heard stories of people's head systems breaking down on long passages. So let's just kind of consider that if something unreasonable were to happen, which there's very few things that could happen that would go wrong with this toilet. In the worst case scenario that something catastrophically failed, you're still just crapping in a bucket at the end of the day. If your head system, your marine head system breaks down, guess what you're doing? You're crapping in a bucket, but at least this one has a regular toilet seat. But again, I mean, as long as you've got core material, you want to vent it, but if you had to not vent it for a little while, you might get a little bit of musty odor, but you're not talking about a significant amount of disgustingness. The head system will actually work unvented. It's just more efficient vented. So there's really essentially no way for this system to break other than an improper install where you're getting liquids into your solids tank. That is pretty much, and that's solvable.
User error?
Yeah, and that's exactly user error, and that's solvable even 600 miles from the coast. You can find something to shim the back of the toilet. Maybe on a starboard tack, we might have to make some considerations on how the liquids make it into the tank if we're healing over pretty hard. But that's a very edge case.
Exactly. So.